This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The crisp January air hung heavy with anticipation. New York's elite gathered at the Academy of Music for the opera season's premiere of Faust in 1870. The opulent theater buzzed with excitement, a sea of silk and jewels swirling beneath the glittering chandeliers. The scent of perfume mingled with polished wood, creating an intoxicating atmosphere that seemed to whisper of secrets and scandals waiting to unfold. Newland Archer's heart raced as he entered the theater, fashionably late. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor, each step bringing him closer to the object of his affection. He scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for one face among the sea of New York's finest. There she was. May Welland, his fiancée, sat in the Mingot family box across the theater. She was a vision in white, her golden hair catching the light like spun sugar. Newland's breath caught in his throat. May represented everything he thought he wanted. Purity, innocence, the very embodiment of New York's social ideals. As the first notes of the overture filled the air, a ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Heads turned, opera glasses raised, all eyes drawn to an unexpected arrival. Countess Ellen Olenska, May's cousin, swept into the theater like a gust of wind from a far-off land. Ellen's entrance was electric. Her very presence seemed to challenge the carefully constructed world of rules and propriety that New York's elite held so dear. She moved with a grace that spoke of European courts and scandals, her dress a shade too bold, her manner a touch too free. Sillerton Jackson, the city's self-appointed authority on all matters of family, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes gleaming with the promise of fresh gossip. "Well, well," he murmured to his companion, his voice dripping with barely concealed glee. "It seems the prodigal cousin has returned. How very continental of her." In the Mingot family box, the atmosphere grew tense. Mrs. Manson Mingot, the formidable family matriarch, had insisted on Ellen's inclusion, much to the visible discomfort of the other occupants. May's mother shifted uneasily in her seat, her fan working overtime to cool her flushed cheeks. The weight of societal judgment hung in the air like a storm about to break. Newland felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He could see the way people were looking at May, their gazes flicking between her and her controversial cousin. In that moment, he made a decision. He would announce his engagement to May earlier than planned, a bold move to shield her from the potential fallout of Ellen's return. As the opera unfolded on stage, a different drama played out in the theater. Newland's mind raced, planning his next move. He imagined wrapping May in a cocoon of respectability, protecting her from the harsh whispers and judgmental stares. The music swelled, mirroring the tumult of emotions in his heart. But even as he resolved to protect May, Newland couldn't help but feel drawn to Ellen. There was something about her, a spark of life and passion that seemed to ignite the very air around her. It both thrilled and terrified him, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you should step back but longing to leap. The final notes of the opera faded away, replaced by the sound of applause and the rustle of silk as the audience rose to their feet. Newland stood, his resolve hardening. He would announce his engagement to May, hoping to shield her from association with her controversial cousin. It was a decision that would set in motion events he could never have foreseen, altering the course of their lives forever. As the curtain fell and the crowd began to disperse, Newland's eyes met Ellen's across the theater. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. In that brief exchange, he felt a jolt of electricity, a connection that both excited and unsettled him. The first intermission was approaching, and with it, his chance to visit the Mingot's box and formally announce his engagement. But as he made his way through the crowd, Newland couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something far greater and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The opera's first intermission arrived, bringing a momentary lull to the evening's entertainment. It was in this brief pause that Newland Archer saw his chance to visit the Mingot's box and formally announce his engagement to May Welland. Archer's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way through the crowded corridors. The air was thick with perfume and the low hum of hushed conversations. Plush red carpets swallowed the sound of his footsteps, while ornate gilded mirrors reflected a sea of silk gowns and crisp black tailcoats. He felt as if he were walking through a dream, each step bringing him closer to a future that was both thrilling and terrifying. As he entered the Mingotts box, a chorus of delighted exclamations greeted him. May's family welcomed the news with open arms and radiant smiles. Mrs. Mingott, a force of nature, despite her small stature, grasped his hand warmly. "My dear boy," she said, her eyes twinkling like stars, "you've made an excellent choice." Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, momentarily soothing his nerves. The news of the engagement spread through the opera house like wildfire in a dry forest. Archer could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him as he made his way back to his seat. It was as if he had suddenly become the lead in a play he hadn't realized he was starring in, thrust onto center stage without knowing his lines. Lawrence Lefferts, the self-appointed arbiter of form in their social circle, caught Archer's eye and gave an approving nod. "Well done, old chap," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. "A most suitable match." The words hung in the air, a stamp of approval from society itself. As Archer settled back into his seat, his mind wandered to thoughts of his future with May. He pictured their life together, a comfortable home filled with fine furniture and tasteful art, their days following the predictable rhythms of New York society. Yet as comforting as this vision was, a small part of him felt a twinge of unease. It was like a pebble in his shoe he couldn't quite shake loose, a nagging doubt that whispered of a life unlived. The opera resumed, but Archer found it hard to focus on the performance. The soaring arias and dramatic scenes blurred together, overshadowed by the expectations that now lay before him. The rigid conventions of their society, once a source of comfort and stability, now felt like invisible bars on a gilded cage. He was both the jailer and the prisoner, bound by rules he had always accepted without question. As the final notes of the opera faded away, Archer joined the stream of well-dressed patrons flowing towards Beaufort's mansion for the customary ball. The night air was crisp and invigorating, a stark contrast to the stuffy atmosphere of the opera house. It filled his lungs, clearing his head for a moment before he plunged back into the whirlpool of society. Beaufort's ballroom was a dazzling spectacle, awash in golden light from crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and the sound of laughter and music. Archer moved through the crowd, feeling both a part of this world and strangely separate from it. He was a fish swimming against the current, aware of every ripple and eddy in the social stream. He spotted Julius Beaufort, the wealthy banker known for his questionable business practices and wandering eye. Beaufort cut an imposing figure in his perfectly tailored suit, his confidence as unshakable as his reputation was dubious. Nearby stood his wife, Regina, a Mingott by birth. She maintained a dignified presence, her chin held high despite the whispers that often followed in her husband's wake. Archer admired her strength, even as he pitied her position. As Archer navigated the intricate social dance of the ballroom, he found himself hyper-aware of the unspoken rules that govern their society. Every gesture, every word, every glance seemed loaded with meaning. He engaged in polite conversation with Sillerton Jackson and Lawrence Lefferts, their words dancing around the scandal of Ellen Olenska's return without ever quite addressing it directly. It was like a game of verbal chess, each move calculated and precise. Throughout the evening, Archer felt a growing sense of alienation. The world he had always known, the rules he had always followed, suddenly seemed less certain. As he observed the complex social dynamics playing out around him, he found himself questioning the rigid structures he had always accepted without thought. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing the intricate machinery behind the polished facade of their society. The ball continued late into the night, a whirl of music and laughter and carefully maintained appearances. But for Archer, it felt like the first act of a play whose script he was no longer sure he knew by heart. As the night wore on, his thoughts kept drifting to Ellen Olenska, the enigmatic figure whose return had sent ripples through their carefully ordered world. As the last dance ended and the guests began to depart, Archer found himself standing on the steps of Beaufort's mansion, looking out into the night. The street was quiet, the city settling into its late-night rhythms. In the distance, he could see the lights of the grand mansion of Mrs. Manson Mingot, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Something stirred within him, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. What awaited him there? What new revelations or challenges would the coming days bring? With a deep breath, he stepped off into the night, drawn inexorably towards that glowing promise of change. The grand mansion of Mrs. Manson Mingot hummed with excitement. Guests streamed in for the much-anticipated dinner, their arrival filling the air with a palpable sense of anticipation. Newland Archer stepped into the opulent foyer, his heart skipping a beat. The scent of expensive perfumes mingled with the soft rustle of silk gowns and the low murmur of polite conversation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering crowd, their light catching on jewels and polished silverware. As the guests assembled in the drawing room, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. Ellen Olenska made her entrance, a vision that took Newland's breath away. Her dress, daring and form-fitting, clung to her curves in a way that made the more conservative attendees gasp and flutter their fans. She moved with grace and confidence, her presence electric, like a bolt of lightning in a summer storm. Throughout the evening, Ellen's behavior continued to shock and captivate in equal measure. Her words, frank and unfiltered, cut through the usual veneer of politeness like a hot knife through butter. When she openly discussed her unhappy marriage and her desire for divorce, Mrs. Archer and Janie exchanged looks of horror, their faces a picture of scandalized disbelief. Newland found himself irresistibly drawn to Ellen. Her worldliness and candor were intoxicating, so different from the sheltered women he knew. As they conversed, Ellen's frustration with New York's rigid social codes became apparent. "It's like living in a beautifully decorated cage," she confided, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of mischief and melancholy. In Europe, one can breathe freely. The dinner progressed, a symphony of clinking silverware and hushed conversations. But for Newland, the rest of the room faded into a blur of muted colors and indistinct chatter. His focus narrowed to Ellen, her every gesture and word challenging the very foundations of the society he had always known. As the topic of Ellen's potential divorce arose among the family members, Newland surprised even himself by coming to her defense. His words, spoken with unexpected passion, rang out in the suddenly quiet room. "Should we not support Ellen in her pursuit of happiness?" he argued, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "Is it not our duty as family to stand by her, rather than cast her aside?" His stance put him at odds with the more conservative family members, including his own mother, whose disapproving frown spoke volumes. The air in the room grew thick with tension, like the oppressive stillness before a thunderstorm. May, observing the exchange with a mixture of concern and something that might have been jealousy, gently placed her hand on Newland's arm. "Darling," she murmured, her voice as soft as silk, "remember our own engagement." Her words were a subtle reminder of his obligations, a gossamer thread pulling him back from the edge of a precipice he hadn't even realized he was approaching. As the evening drew to a close, Newland found himself standing at a crossroads. On one side stood May, representing everything he had always believed he wanted: stability, tradition, and the comfort of the familiar. On the other was Ellen, a siren call of freedom, passion, and the unknown. The carriage ride home was silent, the quiet broken only by the clip-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestone streets. Newland stared out the window, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The gaslights of the city blurred past, each one a fleeting reminder of the life he knew, now thrown into question. As the carriage pulled up to his home, Newland realized that this evening had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, duty, and himself. The stage was set for a struggle that would define not just his future, but the very essence of who he was. Sleep eluded Newland that night, his thoughts a tumultuous sea of indecision. As the first light of dawn crept through his window, he made a decision. He would seek out Ellen to understand these new feelings stirring within him. With a mix of anticipation and trepidation, Newland prepared for a journey that would take him to an unfamiliar part of the city, and perhaps to an unfamiliar part of himself. Newland Archer set out on a journey through the city. His destination was the new home of Countess Ellen Olenska, nestled in an unfashionable part of New York. The streets narrowed as Archer ventured deeper into the unfamiliar neighborhood. The air grew thick with the acrid scent of nearby factories, a stark contrast to the perfumed parlors he was accustomed to. Each step felt like crossing an invisible boundary, leaving behind the gilded world of high society and stepping into a realm both foreign and intriguing. As he approached Ellen's modest dwelling, Archer's heart quickened. The small house stood out among its neighbors, a silent rebellion against the opulence of their social circle. He hesitated at the door, his knuckles hovering over the worn wood. With a deep breath, he knocked. The moment he crossed the threshold, Archer's senses were assaulted. The living space was a riot of colors and textures, so unlike the staid interiors he knew. Vibrant tapestries adorned the walls, their intricate patterns telling stories of far-off lands. Exotic trinkets cluttered every surface, each one a memory made tangible. The air was heavy with the scent of foreign spices, transporting him to bazaars he'd only read about in books. "Welcome, Newland." Ellen's voice floated from across the room, warm and inviting. She stood by a window backlit by the afternoon sun. Her silhouette was a striking contrast against the light. Curves and edges softened into a mesmerizing outline. As they settled into conversation, Ellen's words painted vivid pictures of her past. She spoke of her unhappy marriage to the Polish count, her voice a mixture of regret and relief. "It was like being trapped in a gilded cage," she said, her eyes distant. "Beautiful to look at, but suffocating to live in." Archer found himself leaning in, captivated by her candor. Her desire for freedom, her struggle to fit into New York society after years abroad, it all resonated with a part of him he hadn't known existed. Her words were like a key, unlocking something deep within him, something that both thrilled and terrified him. Their discussion flowed like a river, sometimes smooth and easy, other times hitting unexpected rapids. They delved into art, literature, and philosophy. Archer was struck by the depth of Ellen's knowledge, her perspective refreshingly different. She challenged his views in ways both unsettling and exhilarating, each exchange a spark igniting new thoughts and feelings. "What do you think about divorce?" Ellen asked suddenly, her eyes searching his face. The question hit Archer like a physical blow. He felt a jolt of surprise, followed by a wave of conflicting emotions. I don't think it would be wise," he said carefully, aware of the weight of his words. "Our society, it's not kind to those who break its rules." As he spoke about alternative legal arrangements, Archer realized he was motivated not just by concern for Ellen's reputation, but by his own tangled feelings. The thought of Ellen being truly free, potentially available, sent a thrill through him that he immediately tried to suppress. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room. Archer reluctantly rose to leave, his body moving as if through molasses. Standing at the door, he looked at Ellen. Really looked at her. She was like a painting come to life, complex, beautiful, and utterly captivating. In that moment, as he said his goodbyes, Archer realized with a mixture of excitement and dread that his feelings for Ellen had grown into something powerful and dangerous. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world of possibilities he had never before considered. As he stepped out into the cooling evening air, Archer's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. His commitment to May, the life he had planned, suddenly seemed like a distant dream. The path ahead, once so clear, now twisted and turned, shrouded in uncertainty. Archer walked away from Ellen's house, each step a battle between desire and duty. He was a man torn, caught between the allure of a new exciting world and the comfortable familiarity of the old. As the streets of New York enveloped him, Archer knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Archer awoke to a flurry of activity in his household. Servants bustled about, making last-minute preparations. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of fresh flowers. As he stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling hands, a sudden realization struck him like lightning. Today was his wedding day. In just a few hours, he would be standing at the altar, pledging his life to May Welland. But as he gazed at his reflection, all he could see was Ellen's face, her eyes filled with a promise of a life less ordinary. How could he go through with this when his heart was elsewhere? The day of Newland Archer and May Welland's wedding had finally arrived. New York's social circles buzzed with excitement over this momentous occasion. Grace Church stood resplendent, adorned like a blushing bride. Cascades of white flowers and ribbons draped every surface, their sweet perfume mingling with the heady scent of lilies. The air thrummed with anticipation, a palpable force that seemed to make the very walls vibrate. Newland took his place at the altar, his heart hammering against his ribs. But it wasn't joy that made his pulse race. It was a gnawing unease that clawed at his insides. His eyes darted across the sea of familiar faces, searching for one that was conspicuously absent. Ellen Olenska. Her name echoed in his mind, a silent cry in the midst of the growing murmur. The organ's solemn tones filled the air, swelling to a crescendo. And then, there she was. May appeared at the end of the aisle, a vision in white. She glided towards him, her face a perfect mask of demure happiness. Newland's smile felt brittle, plastered on like a cheap facade. As May drew closer, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an actor in a play, reciting lines for an ending already written in stone. Their vows felt hollow, words without weight. "I do," Newland heard himself say, the phrase hanging in the air like a death knell. With those two simple words, their fates were sealed. The newlyweds embarked on their grand European tour, a rite of passage for couples of their standing. They swept through London's foggy streets, the damp air clinging to them like a shroud. In Paris, they strolled along the Seine, the river's murky waters a mirror to Newland's turbulent thoughts. Rome's ancient ruins surrounded them, silent witnesses to the growing chasm between husband and wife. Each city was a jewel in their crown of experiences. Yet with each passing day, Newland felt a growing hollowness. It was as if he were watching their journey through a thick pane of glass, unable to truly touch or feel the wonders around him. In quiet moments, Newland attempted to ignite a spark of curiosity in May. In a sunlit gallery, he'd point out a particularly striking painting, his voice animated as he explained its significance. May would nod politely, her eyes glazing over with disinterest. "It's very nice, dear," she'd say, her attention already drifting to more familiar comforts, like the cut of a lady's dress or the latest gossip from home. Their evenings in luxurious hotel rooms became a dance of unspoken disappointments. Newland would pull out a book, eager to share a passage that had moved him. The words would flow from his lips, painting vivid pictures of far-off lands and complex emotions. But May would listen for only a moment before gently steering the conversation to more practical matters. Which sights they'd see tomorrow, what they'd wear to dinner. It was like trying to fill a sieve with water, every attempt at depth and meaning simply trickling away. As they stood before the Colosseum, its ancient stones bathed in golden light, Newland felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He turned to May, hoping to see a glimmer of wonder in her eyes. Instead, he found her fussing with her hat, worried about the sun ruining her complexion. "Isn't it remarkable?" he asked, gesturing to the magnificent ruin, his voice tinged with desperation. "Oh yes, it's very old," May replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Shall we find somewhere for tea now?" The gap between Newland's yearning for intellectual stimulation and May's contentment with the familiar grew wider with each passing day. It was like trying to bridge a canyon with a piece of string, futile and increasingly frustrating. Every attempt at connection seemed to highlight their differences, like oil and water refusing to mix. Their last night in Rome, Newland stood on the balcony of their hotel, the eternal city spread out before him like a glittering tapestry. The warm night air caressed his skin, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and distant cigarette smoke. He felt a deep ache in his chest, a longing for something or someone who could truly understand the tumult in his soul. As May's soft voice called him back to the room, he realized with a sinking heart that their honeymoon, far from bringing them closer, had only served to illuminate the vast differences between them. The beautiful settings and luxurious accommodations couldn't mask the growing sense of confinement that threatened to suffocate him. Newland turned from the balcony, his mind already racing ahead to their return to New York. As he stepped back into the room, a strange mix of dread and anticipation washed over him. Something was waiting for him back home, a force that would soon challenge everything he thought he knew about love and society. In the depths of his heart, a name whispered insistently, Ellen Olenska. Newland Archer's return to New York marked a pivotal moment in his life. He found himself inexplicably drawn to Ellen Olenska, a force that would soon challenge everything he thought he knew about love and society. The city streets hummed with a new energy, as if Ellen's presence had cast a spell over the familiar landscape. Archer's footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, his heart quickening with each step that brought him closer to her. He invented reasons to be near her, often under the guise of assisting with her legal affairs. Their meetings became more frequent, taking place in cozy cafes where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of Ellen's perfume, in quiet parks where autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, and in dimly lit parlors across the city where shadows danced on the walls. During these encounters, Archer and Ellen's conversations flowed like a river after a storm, deep and unstoppable. They discussed art, literature, and philosophy with a passion that left them both breathless. Ellen's eyes would light up as she shared stories of her life in Europe, her voice tinged with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. Archer hung on her every word, feeling as if he were discovering a whole new world through her experiences. "It's like I'm a stranger in my own home," Ellen confided one afternoon, her delicate hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The porcelain clinked softly as she set it down, her eyes meeting Archer's, with a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. Archer nodded, understanding all too well the feeling of not quite fitting in. "Sometimes I wonder if we're all just playing parts in some grand performance," he mused, his brow furrowed in thought. The weight of societal expectations pressed down on him like a physical force. As autumn leaves painted the city in shades of gold and crimson, Archer found himself questioning the very foundations of his society. The rigid rules and expectations that had once seemed so natural now felt like suffocating constraints. He saw his world through new eyes colored by Ellen's refreshing honesty and independent spirit. Meanwhile, May Welland Archer, now his wife, remained blissfully unaware of her husband's inner turmoil. Like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, she threw herself into her new role as Mrs. Archer with enthusiasm. Their home became a whirlwind of activity as May selected curtains, arranged flowers, and planned elaborate dinner parties. "Newland, darling, what do you think of these place settings?" May would ask, her blue eyes wide with excitement. Archer would smile and nod, all the while feeling a growing chasm between them. Her voice seemed to come from a great distance, muffled by the roar of his conflicted emotions. The stark contrast between May's conventional behavior and Ellen's unconventional charm became increasingly apparent to Archer. May was like a perfectly composed painting, beautiful but static. Ellen, on the other hand, was a wild, ever-changing landscape that beckoned him to explore, full of hidden valleys and treacherous peaks. As leaves began to fall and a chill crept into the air, Archer's fascination with Ellen reached a fever pitch. He arranged a meeting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, his heart pounding with anticipation as he waited for her among the ancient artifacts and timeless paintings. The marble floors echoed with his restless pacing, each minute stretching into an eternity. When Ellen arrived, it was as if the entire museum faded away, leaving only the two of them in a world of their own making. They wandered through the galleries, their conversation a dance of words and unspoken feelings. Ellen's fingers brushed against a marble statue, and Archer felt a jolt of electricity course through him, as if he had touched a live wire. "Sometimes I feel like these artifacts," Ellen said softly, her eyes fixed on a delicate vase. "Beautiful, but out of place and time." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Archer's hand hovered near hers, aching to close the distance. "You're not out of place," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "You're exactly where you should be." The space between them crackled with tension, a magnetic pull that threatened to overcome all reason. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them sizzled with possibility. But even as their hearts raced, their minds remained acutely aware of the invisible barriers that separated them. They were like two stars, burning bright but destined to remain apart, their light reaching across vast distances but never truly touching. As they left the museum, the crisp autumn air seemed to break the spell. Archer watched Ellen walk away, her figure growing smaller in the distance. He stood there rooted to the spot, feeling more conflicted than ever. The museum encounter had left him torn between his duty to May and the undeniable pull of his heart towards Ellen. The city lights flickered on around him, a stark reminder of the complex world he inhabited, where love and obligation waged a constant battle. The days grew shorter, and a restlessness settled over Archer. He found himself staring out windows, lost in thought, as the first hints of winter began to appear. The approaching change of seasons brought with it a sense of impending transformation, as if the very air was charged with possibility. One evening, as Archer sat in his study, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope made his pulse quicken. It was from Ellen requesting an urgent meeting. As he read her words, a mixture of excitement and dread washed over him. What could be so pressing? And how would he explain his absence to May? With trembling hands, Archer penned a quick reply, agreeing to meet Ellen the following day. As he sealed the envelope, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something monumental, about to take a step that would change everything. That night, as he lay awake beside a peacefully sleeping May, Archer's mind raced with possibilities. The summer season was approaching, bringing with it the annual exodus of New York's elite to Newport. Would this change in scenery provide an opportunity for him and Ellen? Or would it only serve to highlight the insurmountable obstacles between them? As dawn broke, Archer rose, his decision made. He would meet Ellen and face whatever consequences might come. With each passing moment, the pull of his heart grew stronger, drowning out the voice of reason. He stepped out into the early morning light, the city just beginning to stir, unaware that this day would set in motion events that would alter the course of his life forever. The summer season arrives, bringing with it a shift in the social landscape. New York's elite flee the sweltering city, seeking refuge in the coastal haven of Newport, Rhode Island. Newland Archer and May settle into her family's quaint cottage, a world away from their city dwelling. The air is thick with salt and promise, the breeze carrying whispers of upcoming soirees and yacht races. For Archer, however, the change of scenery does little to quell the growing restlessness in his heart. Sun-drenched days blur together, each one a mirror of the last. Archer moves through them like a sleepwalker, his smile a well-practiced mask hiding the turmoil within. He laughs at the right moments, nods at the appropriate times, but his mind wanders, always circling back to one person, Ellen Olenska. Ellen, too, has found her way to Newport, staying with her grandmother, Mrs. Manson Mingot. The grand imposing house stands like a beacon, drawing Archer's gaze and thoughts. He invents reasons to visit, each encounter with Ellen charged with an electric current of unspoken desire. During a picnic on the beach organized by the Wellens, fate grants Archer and Ellen a precious moment alone. They walk along the shore, their feet sinking into the cool, damp sand. The rhythmic crash of waves provides a soothing backdrop to their conversation, which dances dangerously close to confession. Sometimes, Ellen says, her voice barely audible above the sea, I wonder what life would be like if we were free to follow our hearts. Archer's breath catches in his throat. He turns to her, the setting sun painting her profile in shades of gold and rose. Ellen, But the moment shatters as voices carry on the wind, announcing the arrival of other guests. Reality crashes back, and they step apart, slipping back into their socially acceptable roles like actors taking the stage. May, more perceptive than Archer had given her credit for, begins to sense the growing connection between her husband and cousin. Her eyes, once soft with adoration, now hold a glint of steel. She moves with quiet determination, a chess master maneuvering her pieces across the board of Newport society. With a grace that belies her inner turmoil, May organizes social events and activities that require Archer's presence. She weaves a web of obligations around him, each strand limiting his opportunities to see Ellen alone. When Ellen must be included, May ensures it's always in a group setting, making private conversations all but impossible. The Newport season becomes a delicate dance, each step fraught with hidden meanings and unspoken tensions. Archer finds himself trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, torn between duty and desire. The weight of societal expectations presses down on him, as suffocating as the humid summer air. As the days pass, Archer's inner conflict grows. He watches May, seeing her in a new light. Her quiet strength and subtle maneuvering surprise him, revealing depths he had never bothered to explore. Yet his heart still yearns for Ellen, for the promise of a passion he's never known. The season draws to a close, but the tension remains unresolved. Archer stands on the precipice of a decision that will shape the rest of his life. As he looks out over the ocean, the endless expanse of water mirrors the vastness of his own uncertainty. The Newport summer, once full of promise, has become a crucible, testing the very foundations of his world. As the train whistle blows, signaling their impending return to New York, Archer feels a strange mix of relief and dread. The familiar skyline of the city looms in his mind, a stark contrast to the open seas of Newport. He boards the train, his heart heavy with unresolved feelings and the weight of societal expectations. As the locomotive lurches forward, Archer can't shake the feeling that he's leaving something vital behind. What awaits him in New York? Will the city's familiar rhythms drown out the echoes of his heart, or will they only amplify the discord within? Newland Archer stepped off the train, his feet touching the familiar cobblestones of New York City. The bustling metropolis that had once felt like home now seemed to close in around him, amplifying the turmoil within his heart and mind. The cacophony of horse-drawn carriages and street vendors faded into a dull roar as Archer made his way through the crowded streets. The towering buildings cast long shadows, their imposing silhouettes a stark reminder of the societal expectations that loomed over him. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and horse manure, a pungent cocktail that seemed to mirror the conflicting emotions swirling within him. At his law firm, Archer found himself going through the motions, his fingers mechanically shuffling papers, while his thoughts drifted. The once engaging legal cases now felt as dry and lifeless as autumn leaves. His mind, like a restless bird, constantly flew to memories of Ellen, her laugh, musical and free, her eyes deep pools of mystery, the way she moved, each step a dance of grace and purpose. The social obligations that had once been the backbone of his existence now felt like a straitjacket. Dinner parties droned on endlessly, the conversations as bland as overcooked meat. Archer found himself longing for escape, his eyes constantly drawn to the windows, seeking a glimpse of the world beyond the stifling confines of New York society. Despite his best efforts to maintain propriety, Archer found himself spending more and more time with Ellen. Their encounters crackled with an undercurrent of unspoken desire. At art exhibitions, their fingers almost touched as they pointed out brushstrokes, the electricity between them palpable. In parks, they walked side by side, the space between them charged with potential energy. At gatherings, their eyes would meet across the room, a single glance conveying volumes. One afternoon during a visit to Ellen's house, the air seemed to thicken with suppressed longings. The room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the very walls were conspiring to bring them closer. Archer's heart raced, his palms sweaty as he struggled to maintain composure. Ellen's eyes, usually so guarded, now seemed to beckon him closer, like a siren's call he couldn't resist. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, just as Archer felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, a sharp rap of knuckles on the front door shattered the moment. May's family's voices carried through the house like a bucket of cold water, forcing Archer and Ellen to spring apart, hastily composing themselves. In the quiet moments of the night, Archer found himself lost in daydreams of a life with Ellen. He could almost feel the warmth of the sun on his face as they strolled hand in hand through the streets of Paris, or the peace of sharing quiet moments in a sun-drenched Italian villa. In these fantasies, the weight of societal expectations fell away, leaving only the pure, unfettered joy of their love. But reality, harsh and unyielding, always intruded. The potential scandal loomed like a dark storm cloud, threatening to rain down destruction not just on him, but on May, on both their families, on everything he had ever known. His sense of duty, ingrained since childhood, warred with his heart's deepest desires. May, perceptive despite her outward appearance of naivety, began to assert herself more in their marriage. She became a constant presence, her attention to Archer's needs both touching and suffocating. She planned more social engagements, filling their calendar with a whirlwind of dinners and parties that left little room for solitude or reflection. In quiet moments, she would speak of their future together, her words a gentle but firm reminder of the promises they had made. As the days passed, Archer found himself standing at a crossroads, the path ahead shrouded in mist. On one side lay the life he had committed to, safe, predictable, respected. On the other, a life of passion and uncertainty with Ellen. The choice before him seemed impossible, a Gordian knot that tightened with each attempt to unravel it. Archer stood at the window of his study, watching as the sun set over the city. The fading light painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beauty that seemed to mock the turmoil in his heart. As darkness fell, he remained there, torn between the life he had committed to and the life he desperately wanted, unsure of how to reconcile his duty with his desire. Just as he was about to turn away from the window, a messenger arrived with an ornate envelope. Archer's hands trembled as he opened it, revealing an invitation that made his heart skip a beat. The van der Luydens, the undisputed rulers of New York society, were hosting a grand dinner party. As he read the elegant script, Archer realized with a mix of anticipation and dread that both May and Ellen would be in attendance. The stage was set for a collision of his two worlds, and Archer knew that this night could change everything. The van der Luyden family reigned supreme at the apex of New York society. Their grand dinner party was an event of monumental social importance, drawing the city's elite into their opulent home like moths to a flame. The air crackled with anticipation as guests arrived, their excited whispers mingling with the rustle of silk gowns and the soft clink of jewelry. Newland Archer and his wife May stepped into the foyer, momentarily dazzled by the warm glow of countless candles. The van der Luydens' residence was a testament to old money and refined taste, its gleaming marble floors reflecting the soft light like a mirror, while priceless artwork adorned the walls, silent witnesses to generations of high society gatherings. As Newland's eyes adjusted to the light, his heart skipped a beat. There, among the arrivals, was Ellen Olenska. Her presence was both alluring and controversial, her very existence a challenge to the rigid social norms that governed their world. The whispers that followed in her wake were like the trail of her silk gown, impossible to ignore. Newland felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a mixture of longing and guilt that he struggled to conceal. The grand dining room buzzed with conversation as guests took their seats. The soft clink of crystal glasses and the gleam of silver cutlery created a symphony of wealth and privilege. Newland found himself seated far from Ellen, but their eyes met across the table, exchanging silent messages that spoke volumes. Each glance was a stolen moment, fraught with unspoken desire and the weight of impossible choices. Lawrence Lefferts, ever the social barometer, raised an eyebrow at these subtle exchanges. His lips curled into a knowing smirk as he leaned towards Sillerton Jackson, whose keen eyes missed nothing. The undercurrents of the Archer-Olenska relationship were becoming increasingly apparent to those who knew where to look, like a dangerous undertow beneath a calm sea. As the evening progressed, talk flowed from current events to local gossip. May, ever the perfect society wife, engaged in polite conversation with those around her, her voice a gentle murmur that blended seamlessly with the ambient chatter. Yet Newland's attention remained divided, his responses automatic as his thoughts drifted to Ellen like a compass needle always finding north. The air grew thick with unspoken tension as dinner concluded and the gentlemen joined the ladies in the drawing room. The space hummed with activity, small groups forming and reforming like intricate dances. Newland's eyes scanned the room, seeking Ellen with an urgency he couldn't quite mask. He found her in a quiet corner, her face half hidden by a potted palm, the deep green leaves a stark contrast to her pale skin. With his heart pounding like a drum, Newland made his way to her. They spoke in hushed tones, their words heavy with emotion and the weight of impossibility. Ellen's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she whispered, "We can't go on like this, Newland." The words hung between them, fragile and devastating. He leaned closer, the scent of her perfume clouding his senses like a sweet, intoxicating fog. "I know, but I can't bear the thought of—" Their intense exchange was cut short by the approach of other guests. They sprang apart, faces flushed, composing themselves with practiced ease. The moment had passed, but its impact lingered, leaving Newland more conflicted than ever, torn between the life he had chosen and the life he longed for. As the evening drew to a close, Newland felt the weight of watchful eyes upon him. The potential consequences of his actions loomed large, a sobering reminder of the rigid social structure that bound them all like an invisible cage. Stepping out into the cool night air, May gently took Archer's arm. Her touch was a stark reminder of his marital obligations, a silent accusation that pierced through his conflicted heart. As they walked away from the van der Luydens' home, Newland's mind raced with the impossibility of his situation. Torn between duty and desire, society's expectations and the yearnings of his heart. The streets of New York stretched before them, dark and full of shadows, much like the path that lay ahead. Newland glanced back at the brightly lit windows of the van der Luydens' home, catching a glimpse of Ellen's silhouette. In that moment, he felt the ground shift beneath his feet, as if the very foundations of his world were crumbling. Little did he know that May's grip on his arm wasn't just for support. Her eyes, usually soft and trusting, now held a glimmer of determination. For May Welland Archer was no longer the naive bride she once was. She had seen, she had understood, and now she was ready to fight for what was hers. May Welland Archer could no longer ignore the growing connection between her husband and cousin. She knew it was time to take action, to protect her marriage and her future. The soft glow of the evening lamp cast long shadows across the drawing room, painting the walls with a warm, golden hue. May settled into her favorite armchair, her fingers absently tracing the intricate patterns on the armrest. The velvet fabric felt cool beneath her touch, a stark contrast to the heat of anxiety rising within her. She watched Newland, her husband, as he pored over a book, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and growing tension, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to grow louder with each passing second, marking the moments until May would shatter the fragile peace. Taking a deep breath, May broke the silence. "Newland, dear," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I have some news." Newland looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. May's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she delivered her carefully planned revelation. "We're going to have a baby." The words hung in the air like a delicate glass ornament, fragile yet impossibly heavy. Newland's book slipped from his hands, landing on the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the room. His face, usually so composed, was a canvas of conflicting emotions: shock, joy, and something that looked unsettlingly like dismay. May watched him closely, her own expression a mask of demure happiness tinged with triumph. She had played her hand, and now the game had changed. The soft rustle of her dress as she shifted in her seat seemed to underscore the magnitude of the moment. In the days that followed, Newland found himself adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. The impending fatherhood loomed before him like a great, unknowable mountain. He wandered through the house like a ghost, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors, his mind a battlefield where duty clashed violently with desire. At night he would lie awake, May's soft breathing beside him, a constant reminder of the life he had chosen, or perhaps the life that had chosen him. In those quiet hours, his thoughts would inevitably turn to Ellen, her face shimmering in his mind like a mirage, tantalizingly close yet forever out of reach. The moonlight filtering through the curtains cast strange shadows on the walls, mirroring the twisted shapes of his conflicted heart. Meanwhile, Ellen Olenska, sensing the shifting tides of her situation in New York, made a decision that would send ripples through their tightly knit social circle. She would return to Europe, leaving behind the complications and heartache that had become synonymous with her time in America. The news spread like wildfire, whispered in drawing rooms and over teacups, each retelling adding a new layer of speculation and intrigue. As word of Ellen's impending departure spread, it was as if a clock had suddenly started ticking, counting down the moments until she would be gone. For Newland, each tick was a reminder of what he stood to lose, of the life he had imagined but never dared to grasp. The city seemed to close in around him, the familiar streets and buildings now feeling like the bars of a gilded cage. Driven by a desperate need to see Ellen one last time, Newland began to plot and scheme. He imagined clandestine meetings, passionate declarations, and grand gestures that existed only in the realm of his imagination. His heart raced at the thought of a final, private moment with Ellen, a chance to say all the things that had remained unspoken between them. The very air seemed to crackle with the electricity of his suppressed desires. But May, ever vigilant and far more perceptive than Newland had given her credit for, saw through his plans as if they were made of glass. With the precision of a master chess player, she made her move. "Darling," she said one evening, her voice honey-sweet, "I think we should host a farewell dinner for Ellen. It would be the proper thing to do, don't you think?" Newland felt the trap close around him, as inescapable as it was ingenious. With a single suggestion, May had ensured that his last moments with Ellen would be spent under the watchful eyes of their entire social circle. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick and oppressive. The night of the dinner arrived, the air heavy with unspoken words and simmering emotions. The dining room glittered with candlelight, the soft clink of silverware against china providing a steady rhythm to the evening. Ellen sat at the far end of the table, resplendent in a gown of deep burgundy, her eyes meeting Newland's across the expanse of white linen and polite conversation. The space between them seemed to stretch and contract, a living thing pulsing with their shared history and unspoken longing. As the evening wore on, Newland felt the weight of his choices pressing down upon him. He watched May, radiant in her role as hostess, her hand occasionally brushing her still flat stomach in a gesture that spoke volumes. He saw the knowing glances exchanged between the guests, the silent approval of May's gracious handling of a delicate situation. The room spun around him, a dizzying whirl of faces and voices, each moment bringing him closer to the inevitable goodbye. And there, amidst the chatter and the laughter, the clinking of glasses and the rustle of expensive fabrics, Newland Archer realized the full extent of his predicament. He was trapped not by bars or chains, but by the intricate web of social expectations in his own conflicted heart. The realization settled over him like a heavy blanket, smothering the last embers of hope. As the last of the guests bid their farewells and Ellen's carriage disappeared into the night, Newland stood on the steps of his home, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth of the dinner party. May's hand slipped into his, a gesture of unity for any watching eyes. In that moment, looking out at the empty street, Newland felt the last embers of his dreams for a different life flicker and fade, leaving him with nothing but the cold reality of the path he had chosen. The night seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each second bringing him closer to the inevitable. As he turned to follow May back into the house, a sudden, overwhelming urge to run after Ellen's carriage gripped him. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Would he find the courage to chase after his heart's desire, or would duty and expectation keep him rooted to the spot? The answer lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered as the new day dawned. The day of Ellen's departure had finally arrived. Newland Archer found himself torn between his duty and his heart, a battle raging within him as the hours ticked away. With a sense of urgency that made his chest tight, Archer rushed to the pier. His feet pounded against the cobblestones, each step bringing him closer to a moment that could change everything. The bustling port engulfed him in a whirlwind of activity. Seagulls screeched overhead, their cries piercing through the din of shouting dock workers and clanging ship bells. The salty sea air filled his lungs, sharp and bracing, as he pushed through the crowd. His heart hammered against his ribs, matching the frantic rhythm of his thoughts. What if? The question echoed in his mind, growing louder with each step toward the gangplank. The world around him blurred, fading into a hazy backdrop. All he could see was the looming silhouette of the ship, a behemoth of steel and possibility. In that moment, a wild fantasy seized him. What if he declared his love for Ellen right here, right now. The idea was intoxicating, fizzing through his veins like champagne. He could almost taste the freedom, feel the thrill of a new life unfolding before him. His foot hovered over the gangplank, trembling with indecision, but reality crashed over him like a wave, cold and sobering. May's face flashed before his eyes, her expression trusting and innocent. He felt the phantom kick of his unborn child, a reminder of the life growing within his wife. The scandal that would erupt if he left now would be devastating, a wildfire that would consume everything and everyone in its path. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Passengers boarded in a dreamlike haze, luggage floated by as if weightless, and final farewells stretched into eternity. Archer's eyes darted across the deck, desperately searching for a glimpse of Ellen among the sea of faces. The final call for boarding cut through the air like a knife, jolting Archer back to the present. It was now or never. His heart heavy as lead, he made his choice. He stepped back from the gangplank, each movement feeling like he was wading through molasses. The crowd swallowed him up, anonymous faces brushing past as he retreated. From his new vantage point, Archer watched in aching silence as the ship began to move. The massive vessel inched away from the pier, taking Ellen, and all his dreams of a different life, with it. The distance between them grew with each passing second, a physical manifestation of the gulf that would now forever separate them. As the ship disappeared into the horizon, becoming nothing more than a speck against the vast ocean, Archer felt a piece of himself go with it. The dreams, the possibilities, the what-ifs, all fading away like the wake left behind by the departing vessel. A deep sigh escaped him, seeming to come from the very depths of his soul. He turned away from the pier, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his decision. The journey back home stretched before him, a path he now had to walk alone. The streets of New York, once so familiar and comforting, now felt alien and confining, the buildings looming over him like silent judges. As he walked, Archer steeled himself for the life that lay ahead. He would be a good husband to May, a loving father to their child. He would bury his feelings for Ellen deep within his heart, locking them away like a precious but dangerous treasure. But with each step, he felt the key to that lock slipping further from his grasp. The sun was setting as Archer reached his home, casting long shadows across the street. He paused for a moment, looking up at the windows of the house he shared with May. This was his life now, for better or worse. With one final glance in the direction of the harbor, Archer stepped inside, ready to embrace the life that society had laid out for him. As he closed the door behind him, a chill ran down his spine. Something felt different, off-kilter. Little did he know that this decision, this moment of choosing duty over passion, would set in motion a chain of events that would echo through the decades to come. 26 years had passed, leaving Newland Archer a widower in his 50s. Time had etched lines on his face and silvered his hair, but it was the loss of May to pneumonia that had truly transformed him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Archer's study, its golden light catching dust motes that danced in the air. He stood by the window, his fingers resting lightly on the cool glass, watching the bustling New York street below. The city had grown and changed, much like himself, its skyline now punctuated by taller buildings and wider avenues. Archer closed his eyes, allowing the sounds of the city to fade away. In his mind, he was young again, his heart beating with the rhythm of first love. The scent of May's perfume, a delicate floral fragrance, seemed to linger in the air, a bitter-sweet reminder of the life they had shared. Opening his eyes, he caught his reflection in the window. The face that looked back at him was that of a man who had lived a life of respectability and duty. The roles he had embraced, devoted husband, caring father, pillar of New York society, had become the very fabric of his existence. Sometimes, in quiet moments like these, he struggled to remember the passionate young man he had once been. A gentle knock at the door pulled Archer from his reverie. "Come in," he called, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. Ted entered, his face so like May's that it made Archer's heart clench. The young man's eyes sparkled with excitement, reminding Archer of the boundless enthusiasm of youth. "Father," Ted began, barely containing his eagerness. "I have a proposition for you." Archer raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Oh, I want you to come with me to Paris," Ted said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's been far too long since you've been to Europe, and I think it would do you good." For a moment, Archer was transported back to his honeymoon with May. The streets of Paris came alive in his memory. The smell of fresh bread from corner bakeries, the sound of accordions playing in the distance, the feel of cobblestones beneath his feet. He hesitated, the weight of memory and obligation pressing down on him like a physical force. "I'm not sure, Ted," he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "It's been so long." "Please, Father," Ted pressed, taking a step closer. "There's someone I'd like you to see while we're there. Countess Ellen Olenska." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Archer's heart skipped a beat, then began to race. Ellen Olenska, the woman who had once set his world ablaze with passion and possibility. Her name alone was enough to make him feel young again, to awaken feelings he had long thought dormant. Days later, Archer found himself on a ship bound for Europe, the vast expanse of the Atlantic stretching endlessly before him. The journey was a blur of anticipation and anxiety, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Ellen. What would she be like after all these years? Would the spark that had once existed between them still flicker, or had time extinguished it completely? The salt air stung his face as he stood on deck, watching the coastline of America fade into the distance. With each nautical mile, he felt the ties to his old life loosening, giving way to a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in decades. Paris greeted them with a symphony of sights and sounds, the city as vibrant and alive as Archer remembered. The scent of freshly baked croissants mingled with the earthy aroma of coffee from sidewalk cafes. The chatter of Parisians and the distant toll of church bells created a melody that stirred something deep within him. As they made their way through the winding streets to Ellen's apartment, Archer felt as though he were walking through a dream. His heart pounded in his chest, each step bringing him closer to a moment he had both longed for and dreaded for decades. Standing before the building, Archer's hands trembled slightly. He gazed up at the windows above, imagining Ellen behind one of them, perhaps looking down at this very moment. Suddenly a clarity washed over him, as cool and refreshing as a spring rain. "Ted," he said softly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, "I think I'll wait here. You go up and see the Countess." His son looked at him quizzically, confusion evident in his eyes. "Are you sure, Father? She's expecting us both." Archer nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm sure. Give her my regards." As Ted disappeared into the building, Archer remained on the street below, surrounded by the bustle of Parisian life. He closed his eyes, allowing the sounds and scents of the city to wash over him. In his mind's eye, he saw Ellen as she had been all those years ago, vibrant, passionate, and full of life. Her laughter echoed in his memory as clear as if she were standing beside him. He thought of May, of the life they had built together, of the strength and grace she had shown throughout their marriage, the warmth of her smile, the gentleness of her touch. These were the cornerstones upon which he had built his life. He realized that the Ellen he would meet now might be a stranger to him, so different from the woman who lived in his memories. As the sun began to set, painting the Parisian sky in hues of gold and pink, Archer made his decision. He turned away from the building, away from the past, and began to walk. With each step, he felt the weight of what might have been lifting from his shoulders. The streets of Paris unfolded before him, alive with possibility. He passed couples strolling arm in arm, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. Street musicians played melodies that seemed to speak directly to his heart, telling stories of love both lost and found. Archer carried with him the bittersweet knowledge of a love unfulfilled, but also the satisfaction of a life well lived. He had upheld his values, honored his commitments, and found joy in the path he had chosen. As he disappeared into the gathering twilight, the city lights beginning to twinkle like stars, Newland Archer embraced the quiet acceptance of his past. The memory of Ellen Olenska would remain a cherished, untouched part of his history, a beautiful dream preserved in amber. And as he walked on, his steps light and his heart full, Archer realized that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones left unfinished, living on in the realm of infinite possibility.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.